So we wanted to follow this terrific keynote from Kristen with a panel discussion to talk a little bit, kind of tie this in with the medical devices industry. So I'd like to invite my panelists to come up. Well, I'd like to kick things off just by maybe having our three industry panelists briefly introducing themselves. And Jackie, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I'm Jackie Kunzler. I am the head of quality for Baxter. I also came out of 20 years as a scientist in R&D before taking the head of quality position. So have a lot in common with our speaker.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Garth?
Yeah, sure. I'm Garth Conrad. I work for Becton Dickinson now, at least since December. Prior to that, it was C.R. Bard. But I've been on quality in medical device now for close to 20 years, coming up on it. And prior to that, I was in aerospace. And I've been involved in the MDIC effort since the beginning. So.
Great. Thanks, Garth. Robert?
Hi, I'm Robert Killinan from Hologic. I have been in the medical device industry for 21 years, the first 5 in R&D as a software quality engineer, and the last 16 with Hologic, currently the Senior Director of Quality.
Great, thank you. Well, I think I'd like to just start things off by just asking our industry members to just maybe react to the conversation we've had over the last hour. What we're kind of, no, you can't say things like that though. No. Garth, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I found really interesting is around the metrics or the sort of measurement or the controls that are in place. And I go way back in my career when I first started and I was in aerospace. One of the things that got drilled into my head as part of that was through the Six Sigma program at the time. And that was back in the Jack Welch days of GE and all of that. And one of the things that they talked about with metrics there was what the acronym metrics stood for, which was measure everything that results in customer satisfaction. And it's interesting, when you move over to medical device, that acronym changed and it's measure everything that results in compliance success. So the challenge is now, how do you take your business, how do you take your company and move away from measuring everything that's just compliance related to truly getting back to the basics of customer satisfaction? And I think that's a key driver that we all have to take away from this and go back and take a look at what we're doing as a business.
Great, thanks, Garth. Robert?
Yes, thank you. One of the things I found most impactful was around the quality culture. So quality occurs whether or not you plan for it and directly establish it. It will occur naturally. So I think there was a lot of key things I took away from, excuse me, just some of the things where I see that quality culture being cultivated, celebrating the problem finding, the quality month, looking at the learning center, reflecting upon, the strengths as well as some of the opportunities for improvement. And just something as simple as the bike build, I thought was a very key moment in just building and reinforcing that quality culture that, quality is owned by everybody in the facility, in the organization.
Great, thanks. I really appreciated the bike building example too. I thought that was a terrific way of reflecting your quality culture by how you do this community service project.
Yeah, actually we have a lot of examples like that. We do a lot of outreach also, like with the STEM community, with the local schools, and we do similar projects where we build, small model cars, of course, and do this through teams. First, we hand them all the parts, much like we did here. You hand them all the parts in a bag to them and say, please build it, which takes a really long time and they can't figure it out and they don't know what they're doing and they don't even look anything like it's supposed to. And then we put it all, disassemble it all, put it back, and we said, okay. And we kind of divide up the pieces and we tell them, now use 4 people to build it. Divide up the work, and we let them do it themselves. Also a disaster. And then we kind of go through and, okay, this is a really easy part of it. So this person can do 2 or 3 steps. This is a really hard one. This person can only do 1 step. And amazingly, at the end of that, perfectly built vehicles. So they kind of reinforce the thinking that it's not about time or just time or just difficulty. It's a balance of all those things. And so that kind of reinforces in a fun way, even for young kids. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything complicated. It can be really kind of just fun project like that. So it really is about getting our volunteers that aren't necessarily technical people or quality people that, you know, it applies to everything. So.
Great, thanks. Jackie, do you want to share your initial impressions?
Yeah, sure. So, being the head of quality has its up days and down days, and it's always comforting to me when I hear from somebody else and it seems like we're doing many of the same things. So that was very comforting. A couple of things I would also mention, connection to the customer. We spend a tremendous amount of time trying to bring patient stories to our manufacturing sites. And they're always very meaningful and help especially our operations people recognize that what they do every day is so critically important. And then the other thing is we used to focus almost entirely on patient safety. We've evolved to add reliability into that because that was something we were ignoring for a really long time. And that also directly links back to customer experience. So that's an area where we're broadening our thinking.
Great, thanks, Jackie. So one of the things that came up during the discussion and some of our discussions prior to this meeting was this discussion about quality metrics and how medical device firms use them, apply them to assess their own quality practices. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how your firms have defined quality metrics and how you've used them to try to build the culture of quality within your organizations.
Sure, I'll start off. So one of the things that we've tried to do is, again, not focus purely on compliance aspect of things, which is where we all end up quite frequently. But we've broken it down into 3 pillars. Obviously, compliance success is still a key portion of the business. So you have to have measurement of whether or not you're meeting your regulations and the things that you're doing associated with that. Equally as important are the things around safety. When you look at performance of your product, not only from the field, but as you take it back through your entire product life cycle and the failures that you have in the early on steps, which could have led to problems in the field. The third pillar that we have is around customer satisfaction. And those are the things that drive, I'll call it the repeat business, or your customers that want to come back to you and what you're doing. And those are things along the lines of simply a cost of your products, which can be driven by cost of quality items that are internal, as well as the processes that you establish, the complexity of them, and the workforce that you have within your organization. And we've found that balance is what's important from a metrics perspective, because it gives us the full view of the business and it really connects us with the customer.
Great. Robert, did you want to?
Thank you. So we, like everyone, probably have the baseline QMS KPIs, which are really just, we look at that as the health indicators of how our quality management system is operating. Building upon that, we have our post-market surveillance system where we look at typically more of the reactive, how's the product performing in the field, as well as in our manufacturing facilities and at our suppliers. What we're driving more towards is implementing the key quality attributes that are driven off of risk control measures and essential performance, and driving that into a more proactive measuring cycle, so that we're looking at monitoring those at the suppliers through our control plans, monitoring them through our manufacturing facilities, through our control plans as well. Mm-hmm. So that way we can be more proactive. Mm-hmm. And some of the additional activities that we've implemented in our manufacturing facilities are we do daily Gemba walks. Mm-hmm. So cross-functional team from all different disciplines will meet on the manufacturing floor, review a Gemba board, which has a lot of key indicators for how we're meeting our expectations for that day, the previous day, in the effort of Kaizen, continuous improvement, to say how can we continue to improve, and getting that input from all the different disciplines.
Great, thanks. Jackie?
Yeah, and I would just add that you can't improve what you don't measure. And if I went back 4 years ago to, we were in a pretty bad state of affairs. And when I came into quality 4 years ago, we weren't really measuring much. And we put in KPIs, and we probably have, I would say 25 or 30 different KPIs ranging from, first pass yield, recalls, MDR timeliness, CAPA effectiveness, repeat CAPAs, complaints, all the typical ones you're used to seeing. Since we started measuring those, and then every year we try to increase our expectations on those. And so where we started as a baseline, for something may have been 70%. The next year we make it 80% is our expectation. The next year, 90%. And we keep tightening those. And those have really been incredibly helpful, both for driving improvement, but also for helping people understand, where sources of quality issues come from. Moving ahead, we're working in the maturity model program. And I think with that, the hope would be that we start moving upstream into our processes and don't rely so heavily on metrics that come along further downstream.
Great, thanks, Jackie. So one of the things that Kristen brought up was not just what happened with the recall incident, but kind of how your company continued to reflect on that, after it happened. I'm wondering, for our panelists here, do you do any sort of, when you have an incident, maybe not something quite on the scale of this one, but when you have a recall or a finding, do you do any sort of debrief activity to try and improve and do better next time?
Yeah, I think in our company, I'll start off whenever we have a large field action or problem that's occurring. I would say there's more than one debrief that happens, probably too many, as you're working through the details. But yes, as you get through the emergency of the day and handle those things that need to be done, we do have a period where we come back and we do a reflection on what did we look at? What did we see as part of this process? And it's not always about what's the CAPA that you put in place to address the issue that at hand there, but what's the broader sense of the business? Why did we miss this opportunity up front rather than having proactive controls in place that ever could have gotten us there? Whether it be from a management oversight perspective, a process control perspective, whatever it is, we do tend to reflect back on that and look at what we can do as a business to improve those things.
And Robert, I know you have a specific program at your company.
Yes, thank you. So in the spirit of bringing in outside viewpoints, Hologic had partnered with a company called Afterburner. So it's a group of former US fighter pilots. And so they've taught us some of their methodologies. And one of the things that they do is a debrief after every mission. And there's some key principles in that, which are, checking your ego at the door and your rank. So it's really around open dialogue, and it's really around a commitment to the truth and trying to understand what worked well and what didn't work well. And so we've been incorporating that process into our, we can certainly do better. And it's not something that we routinely execute flawlessly, as they like to call it, flawless execution. But we literally just last week had a team pulled together for, I think, 4 or 5 hours on a Friday, reviewing a recent concern we had around customer experience. And it was a multidisciplinary group that got together and really talked about, what went wrong, how did it go wrong, and what can we do better. It's been a useful tool for us.
Kristen, I'm curious if any of your kind of debrief activities kind of changed after that recall experience, or if they've kind of evolved over time.
They definitely changed. During the recall crisis, the debriefing activity that was happening was continuous all day, every minute that there was new information coming out. or some new accusation, you know, we'd have to gather. So we were meeting typically 3 times a day to go through, okay, what happened overnight, what happened this morning, what happened, you know, because we were following, of course, the news cycle. So I hope that never happens for any of you. It was terrible. And of course, because it's a global company, so of course, you know, we work during the day and they work during the night, which meant we worked during the night and then we worked during the day and then worked again during the so anyway, it was a lot of emergency kind of discussion and debriefing going on just to keep everybody up to speed with what was happening. So kind of like you said, the immediate issue, but our immediate issue was stretching over, you know, months. So it was bad. So since then, we actually looked at the process, in which it was part of my role, the reflection of my role about, you know, how to put a communications team together, how to structure the response to the market, should that be necessary, how to, you know, have the appropriate check of information before you go to the press conference or before, you know, preparation for official testimonial and things like that. All those kind of things that, again, I hope you never have to do any of that, but we weren't prepared for that. You know, I think we didn't expect that we were going to have that. It wasn't going to be that big of a media circus. And certainly didn't expect that it was going to affect so many consumers and to the extent that it did. So communication was definitely a weak point at the onset. So reflecting back on the role that I ended up taking, kind of being out there as that technical spokesperson, that became a more standard, you know, if we should ever need that again, we have much more rigor around how we'll debrief, how we'll set those teams up internally. But again, the main point, like I mentioned, was that the whole activity of thinking about it deeply from that kind of 5 why, and again, that reoccurrence prevention. The reoccurrence prevention is probably the most critical part of the whole debriefing process to ensure that you don't have that kind of outflow again.
Jackie, I want to check in, make sure
So we have a couple of different things we use to disseminate information from a sort of lessons learned type standpoint. We use something called a quality alert. We also have the same thing for safety, a safety alert, and these are one-pagers that go out. They've got, you know, a lot of loud, I would say, color to them. So the safety alert's red, the quality alert's bright yellow, and both of those identify an issue that's come up either in a recall or a quality issue or a safety hazard, and the root cause and the corrective actions that were taken to solve for it. And then those are sent to every plant. And the plant management at every plant has to certify that they've done an education of their team to those and that they don't have the same problem within their walls. Similarly, we do a thing we call an inspection citation cascade. And that is when a regulatory body cites us for an observation, we do exactly the same thing. We disseminate, but this time by means of a teleconference. All quality management is required to get on a teleconference, and we go through the nature of the observation and what we're going to do to correct it. And then again, we make all of them certify that they don't have that same problem within their walls. So those are ways that we sort of disseminate best practices.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. I want to mention to everyone, both in the room and online, if you have questions for our panel, feel free to jump in and ask them. Otherwise, I will keep asking them questions. I have all sorts of questions for this great panel. All right, we've got a couple here.
This is for everyone on the panel. Noticing that Toyota is moving towards mobility as opposed to just automotive, and looking at the interfaces in cars now, which can be purely electronic, it's beginning to look more like software as a medical device or as a medical device. What do you think about the congruence of automotive and the medical device? And that makes me think about regulators and how these two industries are regulated. Does NHTSA do things differently than FDA that might encourage more of a customer focus rather than a compliance focus? I don't know where I'm going with that question, but it's
That was a lot of things in that question. I guess first of all, I absolutely see the convergence of medical device and vehicle or mobility products. Certainly, mobility products are not limited to just automobile. We're looking at personal mobility products or even shared mobility products. And not just products, but also services. So there's a lot of, I think, potential overlap in the future. If you go to any of the consumer electronic shows that now have become like another auto show in some ways, you see a lot of convergence of medical things in the car. So measuring biometrics and measuring, detecting when you need to be more alert and watching your eyes and monitoring your heart rate and checking your blood pressure and all these crazy things are happening while you're driving just because you're holding the steering wheel. So lots and lots of, I think, potential overlap, and that's not that far away. I mean, they're showing the devices already, which means, the technology is there. It's just a matter of having the right application or customer. So, I mean, that's close, very close. And certainly, I think as you look at autonomous, the convergence of monitoring medical state or alert state, the early autonomous is going to require, it will drive by itself in some cases, but it's going to have to hand back over to the person in a lot of cases. I mean, it can't see when it's raining or snowing or whatever it is. So, and that'll get better and better over time, certainly, and more autonomous over time, but early systems will require hand back to a human, which means you're going to have to monitor that the human is ready to take back the car, right? So, I mean, you can't hand it back to them and they're sleeping in the front seat. So, there's all kinds of, I think, overlap between medical or human function and the car or the product. So, I can easily then imagine that there would have to be some collaboration between the regulatory agencies. I honestly am not that familiar with the ways of the FDA, other than, kind of what we heard a little bit yesterday and just my general knowledge. But I can say that NHTSA is squarely focused on end customer. It is absolutely about making sure that, the product is safe, easy to use, logical to use, consistent, things are applied the same way. The brake pedal is always here. The steering function is always, things are kind of generally common so that usage of the product is not a huge learning curve every time you go from one maker to another, those kind of things. So if that's not how the FDA is, then they probably will have to come to some happy middle ground on some of those things. And I know there's a lot of privacy and a lot of those things that we're already grappling with. We're monitoring inside the car, and where's that? You're looking at my eyes. Or we're looking at where you're driving. We have short recorders that are watching so that we don't run into things. The car doesn't run into things. Where's that data? Who owns that? All these crazy things around privacy and data ownership. So I can easily imagine that that's gonna get closer and closer together in the future.
Either comment?
Slight pivot. Over the years, I've found that there's a lot of gain to be had by leveraging some of the practices in the automotive industry. A little selfishly, for years, we've kind of poached, product quality engineers and supplier quality engineers from the automotive space because they do a very good job of production controls as well. Sorry.
I was just letting Nate know he's not available.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. As well as concept around PPAP. So how do they transfer information to the suppliers and ensure that suppliers understand that information? Both the company and the supplier partner in the process flow of how the material is going to be made. They participate in a process FMEA for potential risks that could, or defects that could be incurred in the production process. And then based upon the results of the process validation, we'll implement an appropriate control plan. So like I said, selfishly, we've been leveraging the automotive industry for years. So, thank you.
Great. I do have a question from, actually, why don't we go?
For companies who may still be struggling to just feed compliance and to keep up with the compliance part, what would you say is a key cultural attribute that helps shift the mindset from compliance into the continuous improvement in the whole PA? And like you said, prevent the recurrence prevention culture.
So I, having worked for a number of the large medical device companies, I can tell you one of the most interesting things is if your company purely focuses on compliance, you will never be successful. You'll never be successful in your compliance metrics, even if that's what you're focused on. And the reason being, everything else is going wrong in the business and you're constantly dealing with problems, you're never going to get your CAPA metrics perfect because you have too many CAPAs of things you're working on. So I think the challenge is there's an education that needs to occur with the rest of our partners, our peers within organizations about the things that are important to focus on. And I've found that that transition from compliance to focusing on quality sometimes comes from the quality group. Stop acting like cops. You know, if you're walking around in your business and you're writing tickets to everybody within your business all the time, they get frustrated with seeing you and they're not focused on the things that they need to. So sometimes it comes that we have to assume a little bit of compliance risk during the transition because we want to refocus the organization on truly what's important, the things that we should be driving from a customer satisfaction perspective or safety perspective. And that transition is difficult, takes time. It's not anything you're going to accomplish in a month or even a year. A lot of companies, it will take several years for that transition to happen. But once you do, you'll be much more successful as a business.
This is Jackie. I'll just chime in real quick. One of the things that helped us turn the boat around was putting data around the cost of poor quality, because until people see what the cost of a warning letter is, or the amount of time that we were spending responding to observations, that really helped, certainly at the senior management level, get some traction around the things we were doing. And then the other thing I would say is that link to the customer, and in our case, the patient, is really meaningful. And the way we say it often is, it's your father, it's your son, it's your spouse. It's a matter of time before they're going to be on one of our products. And when you find yourself in that situation, it's very meaningful. So I think those are two key things that helped us.
Question for Kristen. Just a kind of a curiosity about the automotive industry and your use of big data for predictive analytics. If you use a big data solution for predictive analytics, do you monitor pre and post market signals to try and predict future performance? Do you do it in an automated fashion?
That's a good question that I cannot comment on. No, so yes, of course, big data is really emerging in the automotive space. Naturally, we as an industry are woefully unprepared to do so. So we have all of the devices generating data, and we don't have enough technologists to analyze the data and generate meaningful information that can, give us some of those predictors yet. But it is a big field and a big explosive area for all of the OEMs, including Toyota, of course. So that's the intention, but it's really still at a fairly early stage. And I'd say woefully under-resourced due to lack of talent, not that we want or can't get it. I mean, we can't get there's not enough people doing that role that, are coming into the automotive industry. So we're certainly under-resourced in that area.
And would your expectation be that it's the same across the industry, whether it's GM, Toyota, and Nissan, everyone is kind of in the same boat on that?
I think there's probably some variation there. There's some that, have maybe been trying at it a little longer. Maybe have a little advantage from others that are still at a more rudimentary stage or have less devices generating data for them. But honestly, the telematics kind of services where the car is connected has been around for 10 plus years. So, I mean, the data is out there. It's a matter of getting the right ability to collect and analyze the data appropriately, and then have it be meaningful to, when is the trigger to say, oh, wait, this is something we should be paying attention to. So still, I think there's some growing pains in the industry from that perspective.
Kristen, one of the challenges we face in medical device is the number of people who play a role in the selection, the purchase, the delivery, the servicing, and then ultimately living with the device. Quite often those are different entities. So as we try to think about that voice of the customer, it's complicated and varies by the kind of device even that you're talking about. But you mentioned before you worry about what sales and delivery thinks, you worry about what service thinks. How do you try to collect those separate VOCs in addition to the end customer, or factor the needs of those different groups into your design inputs?
Yeah, we do. Of course, again, ultimately it's the person that bought the car or the financial product. If it's a financing a vehicle, we sell financial products as well. So, or the service or, whatever it is, but we do have ability to gather the feedback from all those various customers or streams so that we understand, was it, I guess, again, it's that overall experience. It's not just the thing they bought, but how they selected it, how they were educated about the other options, how much were they, did they feel like they were in a pleasant environment? Our dealerships are striving to be kind of that home-like environment where they feel comfortable asking questions and going in 5 or 6 times if they want to and trying different, it's that kind of a vibe to the experience. And so we do take a lot of different survey points and gather a lot of data at each of those different aspects, although again, a little bit different than your case. Finally, the person that's experiencing all those different aspects, it's still the same person, it's the same end customer. So it's a little bit easier because we can just ask the same person at different, points or focus them thinking about this part of the process versus this part of the product and so forth. So maybe a little bit different than the device as you explained.
Question from one of our online participants. and I'll pose this to all of our panelists. How do you ensure quality across the total product life cycle? And how do you make sure that you have processes to support this?
Sure, Seth, thank you. So it certainly starts from early product development, how, probably get the axiom wrong, but planning and requirements gathering is key. The better that you can do that, the more predictive your design cycle, and that includes all the voices, whether it's design for manufacturability, design for service, obviously design for the customer, and design for reliability. Cannot stress enough the time and effort to put into that, because and then it really becomes about communicating knowledge down to each step in that process. So certainly through the product life cycle from product realization, it starts with design. It starts with information transfer from design to, from marketing to design to, the hardware and software engineers, and ultimately to the supplier and manufacturing. But then it really is important, as we've talked today earlier, about the key performance indicators, for early product launch. So are you listening closely enough when you launch a product? What are the things you're looking for? Are we defining reliability criteria as part of our success criteria for when we launch a product? So certainly there's that early life cycle phase monitoring, and then you get into a sustaining phase, and there's certainly established criteria that we're going back to, and we're reflecting back to our risk management files to make sure, are the things that we're seeing in the field reflective of what we anticipated? And if they're not, how do we recover? What does that mean? What are the actions we need to take? And then ultimately, which I think we certainly we could do better, but I imagine we all have the challenges, the planning for products can be on the market 10, 15 or more years. We're very good and excited about planning for a new product launch. It's not as exciting to plan for when you decommission a product. So I think that's certainly a challenge, and that's something we can continue to get better at.
I'll just add in, it's not only planning for obsolescence, it's actually doing obsolescence.
Jackie, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's very much tied into the Xavier white paper on pre-production, production, and post-production thinking. The other thing that I think is really important is the link between post-market surveillance and risk management, tying back very closely and having a close partnership with R&D, so that as you get this information, it's being fed back into the people who are updating the designs and building in improvements to the product. We too do a terrible job of obsolescence. In fact, I'm not sure we ever obsolete anything. They live forever. Our products live forever, and we're trying to improve that, but that's a great source of frustration for me personally.
Kristen, I don't know if you want to weigh in on the product life cycle. It's a different life cycle than our but
yeah, it is. But I guess it's similarly, I talked a little bit about, being involved early and throughout the milestone development and the cross-functional teams. But on the opposite end of the product life cycle, once it's launched to market, for us, the vehicles that we build are, we build them to last a really long time. So we have customers that, we get letters every month of people that have hit 200, 300,000 miles. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, and they're not like taxi drivers. They're like normal people that are just driving their cars for years and years and years. So, somewhere in the range of 20-ish years, that we expect. The fleet turnover is every 10 to 15 years. So, you can expect that we have to provide parts and service for the car for a very long time. So I think we do have somewhat of a similar struggle. I don't know the time frame that you're talking about for your obsolescence, but we do have to continue to provide quality and service, for quite a long time after the part is, or the vehicle or product is launched. And so we do struggle with that. Certainly, the farther away you get from the initial launch, the harder it is to continue to provide that same level of quality and service. But that's kind of our commitment, and so we continuously work towards that.
Do you have any other questions here in the room? Oh,
Yep, I have a question, and maybe it's to Kristen, but also to the others. What I've seen with the Toyota piece that you have is that culture is really the most important thing, the Toyota way, and do the employees buy into it? And so my question for all of the panel members is, can you measure culture? How do you know if one person, one department, one leader isn't really buying into the Toyota way? And then what do you do about that?
That's a good question. It happens. Of course that happens. There's, we always kind of joke, there's always, that always will be the case that, there's people that don't necessarily fully embrace the Toyota way. But honestly, I guess, first of all, because the culture is so prevalent across the company, if you don't buy into that and you're a leader of people, you will have pressure from every direction, meaning your people will put pressure, your people under you will be putting pressure on you. Your peers who rely on you will be putting pressure on you. Certainly, most certainly your supervisor will be putting pressure on you. But there's always times where you, for whatever reason, you don't behave that way. But I feel like there's a lot of support or encouragement to sort of get everybody thinking that way, meaning it's kind of how operations flow. And because everything is so connected, I think it's really difficult to not follow it, meaning there's not this punitive kind of a situation like, oh, you're not following Toyota way, you're going to be fired or you're going to be demoted. It's not like that at all. It's you kind of take it that, oh wait, I'm not getting what I need because I'm not operating the way everyone, the rest of the company is kind of expecting this of me. And you can continue to kind of go against the grain, but it's going to be harder and harder to accomplish your functional objectives because everyone else is sort of working that way. So I don't want to make it sound like it's sort of culty, but it's kind of culty, like it's kind of, if you don't operate that way, you're going to struggle to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish because everyone else is kind of working like that. And so it kind of gets conditioned out of you to do things against that methodology, and you realize how much harder it is to operate it when you're not working that way. So it sort of self-perpetuates or self-motivates. Is that, I don't want it to sound like it's like brainwashing or it's not that way. It's not a negative thing, but you definitely get the sense of, oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting the cooperation or feedback that I was hoping. And then, you're constantly getting feedback from your peers and everyone around you. Wait, well, why are you not doing this or doing this? So it sort of helps everyone kind of stay on the right track.
This is Jackie. I'll just add, I spend most of my time visiting sites, and you can tell when you walk into a site whether the culture is good or not by how the people respond, by how they behave, by how engaged they are, even in terms of the things they have on the walls, the pictures of patients. And I would say that piece, the culture piece, is so critically important to success that when I see a culture that's missing, I give it a short period of time, but then I change out the management because we can't afford to have a poor culture, and it starts at the top.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I actually look at two different things when I go into plants. The first thing is how far away is the quality leader's office from the site leader? And if it's in another building down the road at a completely different place, I know those two don't work together. And so that's a problem. The second thing I look at is when I go out on the manufacturing floor, and if the quality leader is introducing himself as if for the first time to the operators, that's a problem. And like Jackie, it's time to make some changes, and because both of those indicate a poor culture. But thanks for your comment on that.
And that's a great point, Luann, because the plant manager and the QMR, those two, that relationship has to be incredibly good. And when it's not, it's a disaster. So that I agree with you 100% there.
Great. Well, I'm going to, you're talking next, Cisco. So I give our panelists a chance to just make a quick closing comment, and then we'll thank our panelists. So Garth, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll just add on to the last thing regarding culture. It is important to start from the top. I think it's just as important to make sure that you communicate the expectations around culture. All too often what I see is that expectation is not communicated, and therefore the culture is what it is. You have to set the norms, and as a management team, you have to define that and put that out to the people so they understand it. So that's important part. But drawing it back in, I think there's a lot of things that at least personally, I take away from the discussion today, some of the similarities that we see in the automotive industry, and then also some things that are probably best practice that we could look at adopting over on the medical device side. So I really appreciate the discussions today, or the presentation today. So thank you.
Thank you. As a first-time visitor to the MDIC, thank you for taking it easy on me. I appreciate that. But I do truly appreciate being able to cross industry, share some best practices and the information. And I appreciate you inviting me to be able to participate, be able to share my ideas, and I appreciate the questions. Thank you.
Being a panelist from afar, sitting in my pajamas is the best thing ever. No, I just want to say, Kristen, thank you for sharing. It was really great information and very helpful and very reassuring in many ways. The biggest transition we've made over the last several years is stopping from thinking that this is all a punitive exercise in compliance, and shifting to, we all want the same thing. The regulators, the companies, we all are working for the benefit of our customers and the safety of our customers and patients. And that mindset change has been, it's a cultural change, and it's been critical to us having the success that we've had recently. So that's where I'll leave it.
And then for me, first of all, thank you again for inviting us to share some of Toyota's quality information with all of you. As we talked a little bit today, for us, it really is focused on that customer first thinking way. And I know several of you raised that up throughout the questions and the discussion. So I hope that we gave you some good perspective of our approach to that, and how we've centralized our quality culture around that kind of thinking, and really focusing everyone in the organization, whether you're actually manufacturing the product or you're sourcing the product or delivering the product, on that customer, whether that be the end consumer buying the car or service, or the next person down the row from you that you're handing your report or work to. And I'd like to just echo the comments about, again, I think as we move ahead, it is good to share perspectives across the industry. It's good for us to understand some of the differences. Certainly as the products potentially merge and converge in the future, I'm sure there'll be many more opportunities to do so as well. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. And should any further questions come up, please don't hesitate to reach back out to us.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank our panel.